go ahead and grab a seat. Hello. Hello. If you're new, my name is Mike, and I'm one of the pastors here on staff. And a friend asked a friend of mine if it's okay to wear shorts. And we said, yeah, it is. Your parents may care what you wear to church, but Jesus doesn't. Can we get an amen on that? I mean, just to be clear. And Jesus, quite clear. Some of you, I feel you, like, no, that's not true. Jesus wears sandals to church. So, and, well, forget it. I don't know you well enough to make that joke. All right, so, if you're new, we're glad you're here. We're in the book of Mark, and we're exploring some themes from the book of Mark about what it means to follow Jesus. And I know that sounds super basic, but shockingly, how Christians talk about following Jesus isn't always the way Jesus talks about following Jesus. And so we just kind of want to get back to the source material and frame the conversation how he framed it. So if you have a Bible or an app or whatever, you can go to Mark chapter 4. Yep, chapter 4. And we're going to look at a pretty well-worn piece of text. If you have been a church person for some time, you'll have heard this parable of Jesus. But again, there's always another layer to hearing these things. So we never want to approach the text thinking we know it. We always want to approach the text curiously. Because Jesus is far more subversive and radical and beautiful, I think, than we give him credit for. So, Mark chapter 4, verse 1. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. A crowd had gathered around him that was so large that he got into a boat, sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. He taught them in parables many different things. And he said, listen, a farmer, and because we're all agricultural people, this totally makes sense to us, but you know how farmers go and they scatter their seeds. And as the farmer was scattering seeds, some fell along the path, the hardened path where people had been walking. And the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil, and it sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up and the plants were scorched, they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants so that they did not bear grain. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. So the parable would have made complete sense to them, of course. As you are scattering seed as a farmer, you come across different types of soil. 3 of those types of soil aren't productive, are fertile. One is, and the one that is really productive. And so then Jesus said, hey, whoever has ears, let them hear. And that's a way of saying, pay attention, because this isn't super obvious. Then when Jesus was alone, the 12 and others around him asked about the parable. Now, this is super important, guys. Jesus looks at the 12 and the others, and he says, the secret of the kingdom has been given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is said in parables. So Jesus is distinguishing between outsiders and insiders here. And he's saying the 12 and the others that he's talking to are the insiders, but to outsiders, he speaks in parables. And then notice why. He quotes from Isaiah 6. That they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven, which is so odd. If you're paying attention, it sounds like Jesus is saying, listen, the reason I'm teaching in parables is because I don't want people to believe. And you're like, that doesn't sound very Jesus-y, as it turns out. And the quote from Isaiah is where God calls Isaiah in chapter 6 and says to Isaiah, listen, your prophetic ministry is going to reveal the hardened hearts of Israel. And so it's interesting that Jesus pulls this quote in because, again, it sounds like, wow, he's going to reveal the hardened hearts of Israel. And there's that bit at the end where it sounds like, oh, he doesn't really want people to get it. And then Jesus said to his disciples, don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? And then he explains it for us. All right, so the farmer sows the word. Now, we're gonna find out later what that means, the word, but just keep that phrase in mind. The seed represents the word. Some people, so the people turn out to be the soil. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seeds sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, this is the third soil, like seeds sown among thorns, they hear it, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. And others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word and accept it and produce a very productive crop. So, Mark has introduced Jesus through his temptation and in the wilderness, and Jesus announces the coming of the kingdom. As Susie covered last week, he gets into all of this conflict with so many of the segments of the society around him. And then he tells this parable where he seemingly distinguishes insiders from outsiders and says, okay, insiders, you get the secret. Outsiders are going to miss it because I'm going to talk in parables. And then he explains this, that there are going to be different reactions to his message. Now, I have always thought that Jesus, when he tells this parable, is describing the people, the crowds, the people out in Israel. There's a Bible scholar who I've been reading and listening to recently named Tim Gombes, who, channeling some other scholarship, has argued that no, this parable, because that's how I've always preached it, that's how I've always understood it, has argued, no, this picture of the three soils that are bad and the one soil that is good, this is a picture of the disciples. And it's the disciples who are going to be the ones who get the seed that will be sown and snatched by Satan. The disciples are the ones that will fall away because of persecution. The disciples will be the ones that fall away because of deceitfulness of wealth and concern for other things. And the way Mark shows this is amazing. I'd never noticed it before. And if you're a Bible geek like me, you're like, yeah, this is amazing. If you're like a normal person like you, you're thinking, okay, cool point, but I'm really thinking about food trucks. Totally understand that. So my job is to dazzle you with how important this seemingly minor insight is. Because what Mark does this all over the place. We are very illiterate when it comes to the Bible. The Bible was written by people who had help. All right? We read the Bible and it's like, oh, here's Jesus doing this and here's Jesus doing that. It's just a collection of random stories. Mark has an agenda, and so Mark brackets the stories with events, similar events or teachings that actually explain all of the stories in between. So this quote from Isaiah that's really confusing is followed in chapter 8 by a quote from Jeremiah that says the same thing. And that from chapters 4 to 8, what Mark is actually going to do is show all of the ways the disciples are the ones who see but never perceive, and hear but never understand. And those that we thought were outsiders are the ones that actually see and hear and perceive accurately Jesus. Make sense? So he's going to flip what we hear as like, oh my goodness, that's so harsh of Jesus. He doesn't want people to believe. No. Actually, this is Mark's way of telling you that the hardness of heart that is portrayed here is actually from the disciples, and it's the outsiders who get Jesus more accurately. Right? So let me give you a couple examples. Fire up the telestrator. So the disciples miss it. So Jesus here, he calms the storm. The disciples react and he says, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Next. Then they saw Jesus walk on water. And he says, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Next. They climbed in the boat with them. The wind died down. They were completely amazed, For they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were what? Hardened. Interesting comment about the disciples. Next. You never want to hear this from Jesus. Are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? And if you look for these statements of Jesus to the disciples, they're all over the place. And in chapters 4 through 8, you're dying to know, there are all these outsiders that get it. It's fascinating. Next. So here's a demon-possessed man. This guy has a legion of demons in him. He's cutting himself. He lives among tombs and pigs. He could not be more radioactively unclean. And Jesus comes and heals this Gentile. And then next. Oh yeah, go back. Yeah, he didn't say that to the guy. He didn't say, are you so dull to the guy? He actually blessed the guy, so I messed that up. Next. He blesses the guy, needless to say. Then he comes across a dead girl. Her parents come and beg Jesus to heal this. It's Jairus, the synagogue leader. Would you heal my daughter? And he takes the girl by the hand and says to her, little girl, I say to you, get up. So here's an outsider that immediately responds to Jesus, and Jesus immediately responds to them. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. Next. Woman with the issue of blood interrupts this whole dead girl story, and Jesus touches the hem of Jesus, and Jesus is like, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace to be freed from your suffering. Next. How many strikes is this description against somebody in the first century? A mixed-race Gentile woman with a demon-possessed daughter. Okay? Like that, you don't want that as a LinkedIn profile. But in Jewish culture, again, she is radioactively unclean. She comes in as a conversation with Jesus, and Jesus says, for such a reply, you may go, the demon has left your daughter. Now, I'm just trying to illustrate something where Mark is taking this picture of soils, and he's applying it to the disciples. The disciples' hearts actually grow harder as the narrative progresses, and there are all of these outsiders, all of these unclean, demon-possessed people who are literally seeing and recognizing Jesus. That's the point of this section, is that those who should recognize Jesus don't, and the ones who shouldn't do. And so very often, the ones most in danger of misunderstanding are those who claim to know. That's the point. This comes to a head in chapter 8, right? This is the other end of the bracket. Are you guys out there? Yeah. All right, is this making sense? Yeah, that was a lot less. So here it was. All right, let's just play that back for a second. Are you guys out there? Yes! Does this make sense? Yes. No, that's not what you said the first time. No, I'm replaying what you said. Does this make sense? Yes! Or no. Are you out there? Yes! Does this make sense? That was how it was. All right, so I'm speaking in parables so that you may not understand. No, yes. Thank you. Oh, God bless you. Bless your heart, I've learned, which isn't always a good thing to say to people. I've learned that. I'm learning what grits are. I'm learning 3 weeks ago, I said, hey guys, is it always this hot and humid? And you laughed at me and said, no, it's actually not bad yet. And I see what you mean. This is ridiculous. And it gets worse? I went outside. Well, no, you don't care. And I need to preach. All right. So in Mark chapter 8, Jesus is on the tail end of 2 feedings. He feeds 5,000 people. He feeds 4,000 people. And these are really profound lessons that the disciples seem to miss, all right? This is the culmination of this whole section. Jesus gathers the disciples after they fed the 4,000. He says, listen, guys, be careful of the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, because we're all bakers in here, We know that yeast is what you put into bread or to dough to make it rise, but it's also a metaphor for a little bit of something that infects everything else. And so Jesus is actually using it in its metaphorical sense to say, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. A little bit of hypocrisy will kind of ruin the whole thing. The disciples misunderstand, and then they discuss it among themselves and like, well, he must be saying this because we don't have any bread. Because they didn't have bread for the 4,000 or the 5,000. Aware of their discussions, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? And this is the quote from Jeremiah. Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? So, big point. What Jesus has done is he's used this image of seeing but not understanding, or hearing but not understanding. And we've seen the disciples kind of unravel over the 4 chapters while insiders are getting it left and right. And he finally looks at them and he applies that image to them directly. And we realize the disciples are actually really struggling with who Jesus is and what he's done. Now, relevance is coming in about 10 minutes because we have one more piece of text we've got to look at to make sense of all this. Later in chapter 8, after this episode, Jesus and disciples go to a village, verse 29, chapter 8. They go to a village. Jesus asks them this very famous question, but what about you? Who do you say that I am, right? He asks, who do the crowd say that I am? And they say, one of the prophets. But what about you guys, the 12? Who do you say that I am? And then Peter answers, you're the Messiah. And you think, yes, we got it. This is awesome. They totally understand. Perfect. And then it says, and Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. And you're going, that's interesting. Peter got it, right? Why doesn't Jesus want people to know? And actually, all throughout Mark, Jesus is saying, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody, don't tell anybody. Not every miracle, but most miracles. Don't tell anybody, please don't tell anybody. And you're like, what in the world is going on here? And then, verse 31, Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man, the title for himself, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. Now, to us, that's like, that's Good Friday and Easter, totally. But for them, Jesus was a king. That's what Messiah means. Kings, as we all know, don't get crucified, right? They don't go to the capital of the nation and then be put to death in a very torturous way. And so Jesus teaches them this. And he spoke plainly about this, and then Peter took him aside and what? Rebuked him. Why? Because that's not how this thing goes, right? Messiahs are supposed to come, kick out the Romans, vindicate Israel, right? Begin new creation, not be rejected and then suffer and then killed. And again, this is a very famous story, but I mean, what kind of guts do you have to rebuke Jesus? I don't even know. You've just said he was the Messiah, and then you realize Peter has no clue what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. Because instantly Jesus is like, don't tell anybody, but I have to suffer and die. And Peter can't handle that. And so he rebukes Jesus, and then notice Jesus' response. When Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. Right? You're out in front of me trying to lead me. Get back and follow me. And then he uses this word Satan. Satan is how it is. It's not a name, it's a title. And remember in chapter 4 when we talked about the soil where Satan comes and snatches the seed away once the word is preached? This is what is happening here. Because the word that the farmer is sowing isn't just, hey, God is king and is here. But it's God is king, God is here in Jesus, and Jesus is going to suffer and die. It's the thing that's so offensive about this word that makes it difficult to understand is that God is going to win by losing. He's going to live and conquer by dying. God is going to allow his Messiah to die a shameful death. That's the thing. And Peter can't handle it. So he rebukes Jesus. And Jesus, so in Mark's telling of this story, this is what it looks like when Satan snatches the seat away. Satan is fine with Jesus being king, just as long as Jesus didn't go to the cross first. That's what the temptations were. You can have all the power, just don't suffer and die. Here, Jesus is insisting he has to suffer first, and the disciples are like, no stinking way. That's the hardness of their hearts. He looks at them and says, you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Now, are you with me so far? All right, I'm not going to ask the next question. I'm just going to rest in that answer. But this has been building to this text right here. All right? Then Jesus called the crowd and along with the disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Now again, we church people were very familiar with this text. But think about what we've done to it. For Christians, the cross is a place where Jesus died so we don't have to. For Jesus, the cross is a way of life, an entire way of orienting yourself. Would it be weird if you walked into a gathering on a Friday night and there was an electric chair right in the middle of a big gathering space, and there were people gathered around the electric chair telling stories about someone who died on the electric chair. They had jewelry that had the electric chair on it, and then they took a meal that said, hey, this represents this guy's flesh and blood that was put to death on the electric chair. Would you think that's a little odd? Right? We parade around this symbol of Roman torture and think, yeah, that's the place where Jesus died. And Jesus presents this symbol as a place where we join him in his death. In other words, the cross is a way, for Jesus, it's a way of life. And what does that way of life consist of? Whoever wants to save their life has, and the word here for lose is actually the word destroy. For whoever wants to save their life has to destroy it, but whoever destroys their life for me and for the sake of the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? This is the part that was offensive to the disciples. And this is the part that is still offensive to Christians thousands of years later. People on crosses give up their rights. They relinquish their rights. They surrender their rights. They don't press for their rights. The cross is not a symbol of self-promotion, self-glorification, or self-interest. People on crosses have died to the world. The entrance right into the Christian faith, baptism, is the symbolic joining of my life to his death. It's the abandonment of power and power seeking and glorification, right? The cross-shaped life looks nothing like glory or status or wealth or success. And the thing that the disciples keep missing is that the kingdom comes and it's going to be glorious. But the outsiders, those people have nothing in the world. Those people who are so destitute, all they can do is fall down and beg Jesus for help. Those people get that it's coming through suffering because they themselves are suffering. And to them, Jesus meets them. So what we want to reflect on a bit this morning is, what is it like to be dead? I mean, if we've joined Jesus in his death, and I know this kind of language can be abused. I'm just talking about how so much of my Christian experience has been seeking the very things that Jesus says not to seek, following the very temptations that Jesus himself resisted. Avoiding discomfort, avoiding suffering, avoiding persecution. And what it means to follow Jesus, we think Jesus is going to help you be a better person. Jesus is going to help your marriage. Jesus is going to help your business. We sell Jesus like he's an add-on to a consumer product. He's your warranty for your car. And Jesus is like, no, you don't understand. To follow me means. I ascend my throne on the cross, and I govern a kingdom defined by the cross, and everyone who is properly Christian sits on a cross with me. And so what are cross people like? Cross people are people who aren't fighting for their rights. They're not living in fear and paranoia. If it's true that we've died to the world and stand to inherit all things in the age to come, it's just so weird that we're so afraid. It's so weird that we're so anxious. It's so weird that we are just constantly making enemies of other people. It's so weird that we think political power will save us. It's just so weird that we think good churches are large and glittery ones. And that celebrity pastors are real things. I mean, and I fall for all of it. I'm preaching no one but me. I've done this whole thing. But this is a strong word that comes to us in an American culture that worships status, power, and glory. And then Christianizes that. The only thing Christian properly is the cross and the people who inhabit and embody that. So we're going to take the next set of weeks to kind of explore, what do cross-shaped people look like? What do cross-shaped people do? There's a deep surrender at the very heart of this thing, that I'm laying down all that I could do in my own flesh for my own agenda and my own power. And there's the picking up of utter and absolute self-expenditure for the sake of others. That's the cross. What did Jesus do there? He expended himself for the sake of others. What's our life to consist of? Same thing. So, I don't know about you, that gives me a lot to think about. Are you out there? So, it's just weird that we celebrate a death. It's just weird. I guess I never want to lose how weird this is. That a symbol of Roman torture has become for us the ultimate symbol of hope, victory, and meaning. And that this meal, this little meal that we take, this is not only something that's happened to us and for us, but it's actually our job description now. We are to be this for the world. Not in some salvific sense, but in the same way that Jesus self-expended for the sake of others, we join him in that. So we're going to take the Lord's Supper. All and everyone is welcome to take this. But we just want to recognize what it's an invitation to. It's not just an invitation to say, yes, Jesus, thank you for what you did for me. Thank you for the cross as it exists for you. But it's an invitation to join him in that. So let me pray for us and we will dive. We'll just take a few moments together. There's communion around the room. There are places to journal in the back. If you're praying for somebody or want prayer or just thankful for stuff, there's always, those things are always going to be available. But we want to just give this time to you to pray, to take the bread and the cup, and to reflect on what we've explored this morning. So Lord, thank you. We bless you. We're grateful for you. Lord, give us grace, mercy, and wisdom as we wrestle with these things, as we realize the invitation to follow you is much more profound. And so God, please, would you work through the power of your Spirit and your word to form and shape us as a community into a community that looks and talks and acts like Jesus. So we love you. Amen.